a couple of things I wanted to do to introduce um, for about 2, 3 minutes, I hope. I remember when I went to the 25th anniversary of the March on Washington, the 63 March, I was very distressed because it seemed like everybody was honoring something else and it wasn't Martin Luther King. There was this idea and that, children and grown-ups and aging and the country and the city and the world. And I was really distressed for about, for a while. Then after 10 or 15 minutes, I realized, oh, actually what happened was Martin Luther King inspired all these things. And it wasn't that he was being ignored, but that it was his words were spreading out into all kinds of fields and ideas. And many people were seeking their freedom through the words that Martin Luther King Jr. brought to us. And so then I had peace and had a wonderful day there 25 years after 63. Well, I'm actually bringing that into my Marvin Kaplan Social Action Committee celebration commemoration as well. This is his yard site, and I'm thinking that two or three of our speakers will talk about specifically things that Marvin Kaplan did and related to Martin Luther King and Rabbi Abramowitz and Carl Bergman in particular. But also, Rabbi Feinberg, Esther Herman, and my mother will talk about ways in which the goals that Martin Luther King and Marvin Kaplan had actually spread out into other places, including John Lewis, by the way. So I just wanted to say that. I also wanted to mention to you that a filmmaker is now making a film about Neighbors Incorporated, which you'll hear more about when Rabbi Abramowitz speaks, and you may be hearing from all of us more. People like Barbara and Howard in particular. I'm thinking of you should be interviewed for this upcoming
Oh,
film
yeah.
and others. So I'm just letting you know that you'll be hearing more about this. Now, to go to what we're going to be hearing next, you know that there are lots of programs that are out now trying to essentially bring white people up to speed on what it is that black people have known all along, or to talk, or maybe not known, like about lynching in Montgomery County, Maryland, those kinds of things. And when the listing and the links to these sorts of programs started showing up on the TI listserv and personally to me, one of the first things I thought was, well, I feel like I know all this stuff. I don't need to go through the misery of looking at lynching again, but maybe other people do. But maybe what I could add to your viewing of such things is how do black people react to these programs. In other words, you can look at the programs, and I hope to have a page on the Social Action Committee section of the TI listserv that this lists programs you can go to about that give you background on all these things. But I'd also like to have other programs to give you a different insight on how African American community people as a whole react to programs like that. Because a lot of times I know I actually have white people fussing at me because I don't want to go to these programs. And I already know what happened. I don't need to hear another word about it. And to give you that sort of an angle on it. And that's going to come up when we talk to Esther Herman in a few minutes, uh, because she did something that's very powerful for African American people, and she didn't even notice it. So I'm gonna, if she doesn't talk about it, I'll interrupt her and tell you how important it is to us. And finally, I want to say that to those of you who would like us to start having younger people for our Shabbatons or social action, I do too. But I also felt like we need to hear from those who are with us now and toward the last tenth of your life kind of thing. I want to share. I felt like we should share what the old have to share right now, and hopefully next year we'll bring in the young ones. So I want you to know that it's not that I've forgotten the young people. I really want you. Please don't run away. And in that connection, you should go to the program tomorrow, the JUFJ program. Okay, and uh, okay, that's it for my intro. I'd like to start with Rabbi Abramowitz. Rabbi Werbo, are you there? Do you want to do anything to share first before we go?
Oh, you're doing great. Thank you.
Okay. Rabbi Abramowitz, thank you. And he should have the whole screen. Thank you.
What is it that you'd like me to
And
begin with?
I would like, I am particularly interested in having people know something about Neighbors Incorporated, your involvement in the formation of it, and also what led to Tiferet Israel being a place where protesters for the 1963 march stayed at Tiferet Israel that night. Because those are the two things that I'm interested in.
First, let me say a word about Tiferet Israel. At the time that I came to Tiferet Israel in 1960.
Rabbi, we can't see your face. Is there any way?
Can you see me?
We can see you when you sit back, but not when you were just.
Okay, can you see me now?
Yes, we can. Mm-hmm.
Okay. When I came to Tiferet Israel in 1960, I came to a synagogue that, since its founding in 1916, 1917, it was an Orthodox shul. They had become conservative just a few months earlier. They decided that the synagogue was having great difficulty. It was having financial problems. It couldn't pay its staff. It couldn't pay its mortgage. And so they thought maybe if they became a conservative synagogue and got a conservative rabbi, things would change. So that's the atmosphere that I came in. At that time, Tiferet Israel's membership, which was very small, just a couple of hundred maybe. When I was interviewed, they said they had 400 families. That wasn't true. They didn't. Maybe they had 300, but 100 were not paying dues. So maybe it was really a couple of hundred. In any event, the membership of Tiferet Israel was male only. Only men could be members of the shul. And women, if they were affiliated with the shul, it was through their husbands. They did not have a vote at synagogue meetings. Only men had votes at synagogue meetings. There was a sisterhood, and that's where women could play a role. But the purpose of the sisterhood was to take care of the Oneg Shabbat and the Kiddush, and to make money from it, and then to give a contribution to the synagogue out of their earnings. So that was the role for women. As to the service, it was a strictly Orthodox service, which, by the way, we maintained for many, many years, in the sense that the synagogue service was a completely traditional service with all the prayers recited. And when I came, there was the most important member of the staff was the cantor, the shamus. And he was, by his own definition, weltberühmt, which means world famous. And he chanted services with a great big voice. And there was no congregational participation whatsoever, no congregational singing, because that would throw the cantor off. So it was just solo performances. He wasn't with us, however, at the most important times. He wasn't with us for the high holidays, and he wasn't with us for Passover, because on those occasions, he starred in the Borscht Belt. He went to upstate New York to a place called Kutcher's, which was famous at that time, a kosher place in upstate New York. And there he did his solo performances. And we hired various cantors for services for the high holidays and for Passover.
Wow.
Needless to say, having described this sort of atmosphere that the synagogue projected, the synagogue didn't know anything about social action, didn't know anything about participating in the greater community. Their concern was the daily minyan and the kosher kitchen, and none of those other secular activities, such as the marches and so on. But that was of great importance to me. I thought from the very beginning that Judaism and ethics were interrelated. And without ethics, Judaism became almost an idolatry. It became something that ritual was paramount, and even more than paramount, was all there was. And ethics was simply not part of Yiddishkeit at all. My view was the opposite. From my point of view, the core, the basis of Jewish tradition was tzedek, was justice, and tzedakah, charity. Tzedek and tzedakah, justice and charity. That's really what it was all about. The rest was part of the package, but without the justice and charity, it was almost an idolatry. So it was natural for me when I came to Tiferet Israel to immediately join Neighbors Incorporated. And of course, the day after I joined, I was put on its board of directors and became active in all of its activities, including to do whatever we could to stanch the flight from the neighborhood. There was a flight in progress. Jewish families and white families overall were fleeing our beautiful neighborhood and going to the suburbs. And Black families were, of course, moving in and were very often not very welcome into the neighborhoods. One of the things that I tried to do right at the beginning was have an Oneg Shabbat on Friday night in order to integrate ourselves into the neighborhood, a Friday night in honor of the neighborhood. And we put flyers in under all of the doors in the neighborhood, inviting them to a Friday night service and to an Oneg Shabbat afterwards, in order to have them feel close to us and to welcome them into the community. Neighbors Incorporated had an annual social, and they needed a place to have their annual social. Very often they had difficulty finding a downtown hotel or a downtown public place that would welcome them for their meeting. They could go to some of the churches, but they felt that that's not what they wanted. They wanted really to be integrated into the larger community. And so they came to Tiferet Israel and asked for permission to use our facilities, which I was delighted to welcome. And all of the Neighbors Incorporated early annual meetings were held at Tiferet Israel. If you want to know what the atmosphere at the time was, I can describe one episode for you.
Please do, yes.
Pardon?
Yes, please do.
I was sitting in my office one day at Tiferet Israel when there was a knock at the door, and in comes a representative of the community downtown. And they came and they said that it has come to our attention that there are socials that are being held at your synagogue that were sponsored by Neighbors Incorporated and by other like organizations. And Rabbi, you are not really licensed for that. You're licensed for a synagogue and for religious activity. And of course, if your synagogue sponsors a social, we will allow that to take place as well. But you are not allowed to have outside organizations hire your facilities. You're not licensed for that. You're licensed only for religious activities. And it has come to our attention that there are these secular organizations that are having socials in your synagogue, and that's against our zoning, and we will shut you down if you don't stop that. And I said that, well, are we allowed to have our own socials? our own synagogue socials? He said, of course. I said, fine. Then what about if we'll co-sponsor all of these activities with Neighbors Incorporated? Or we'll become the sponsor and they can simply join us. And he said, Rabbi, don't play games with us. We'll close you down. And he was representing the district government at that time. Well, we did not change our approach to it, and we did not get shut down. Well, that's something about what life was like at that time.
You're telling me things that I've never heard before. This is amazing. I had no idea.
Yes, yes, it was not pleasant. I also had Friday night services to which we invited the community, and we had conversations afterwards in the Turner Auditorium. And on one of those occasions, this was after the riots had taken place in Washington. And there was a great amount of fear of the Black community, including among our own members. And so there was a certain amount of resistance to having any kind of invitation to the neighborhood and to the community. So we had a Friday night service at Oneg Shabbat afterwards, and the floor was open, and we were having kind of discussions back and forth. And on one of those occasions, one of our members got up to speak at the Oneg Shabbat down in the Charter Auditorium. He had his arm in a sling, and it was after the riots that took place in the 60s. And he said, Rabbi, you're saying all these very nice things, but why don't you pay attention to reality, to what the Black community is all about? They just shot me, and they just ransacked my store. So that's the truth of the Black community in Washington, D.C. That was one of our experiences in the 60s. Needless to say, a pretty difficult experience.
Sounds like the '68 riot after the death of King. Mm-hmm.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
But again, my own view was that at rock bottom, Judaism was a tradition that incorporated ethics and morality at its very core. And without that, it was fraudulent. Without that, it was not monotheism, it was moneytheism. And without that, it was not a commitment to our Father in heaven. It was not a commitment to Adam being the first human being and all of us descended from the one human being. We are all therefore one family. The wonderful rabbinic story of why did God create a humanity out of Adam Harishon, the first human being? Why didn't he create a black person, a white person, a brown person, a yellow person? Why didn't he create all these different people from whom all of the nations of the world descended? Why did he create just Adam Harishon? And the rabbinic response is because in order for no one ever to be able to say, my father was better than your father, but all of us have to acknowledge that our father is the one father, Adam Harishon, the original Adam. We are all descended from the same father, and he from the one Father in heaven. And we are all therefore one family and one community.
Well, I'm thank you. You know, I do what I had hoped. Your stories are so interesting. I want to hear you for the next 2 hours, but I've got 4 more people, and I'm thinking. I don't know if you want to respond to this one question now from Julie, or did you, what was the response to the person, to the member in the sling? Sounds like you gave the response, didn't you? Your response to the person who said they just shot me.
Yes. What was my response?
You just shared it with us, I think, right?
My response was, I'm sorry.
Yeah, yeah. That's not what this is about. Yes, I apologize for having to um, move on, but I see
Or
we're
not
almost
at all.
half an hour. We're all 26 minutes into the hour, and I do want to hear everyone. It's clear that we need to come back and do longer on a day when we can record some of these wonderful stories. I wanted to go from you actually to Esther Herman.
Oh,
And thank you again, Rabbi Abramowitz,
Absolutely.
and then
Thank you.
uh,
so, well, I want,
okay, and
you can introduce me.
well, everybody knows Esther Herman, of course, but the particular reason that I invited you, and I know you want to share some other things as well, is that you were talking about lactation and helping uh, mothers, obviously young mothers if they had babies, and you were just describing some of the babies and mothers you were helping, and you described nursing a black baby. You just mentioned that the mother was African American, and you just kept right on talking, and you didn't. It didn't seem like a big deal to you, but I didn't realize until that happened and I heard you, that I realized what a deep grief and sorrow I have as an African American, that in slavery, the milk of black mothers didn't belong to them, it belonged to the white children, and that it moved me greatly. I was in tears. You didn't even know. I remember I was just sitting at your other house, and you still don't remember it because it was to you it was natural to help any baby that was near you. And I just want to say that, and now you can talk.
Thank you, Cara Olivia. Before, just tailing a little bit on what Rabbi Abramowitz said, he's the reason we joined TI. There was an article about his involvement in Neighbors Inc. In the Washington Post, and we read it, and we were shul shopping. I think we were at our third shul in 3 years, and we read that. It reminded us of our time back in Berkeley. And when Jean and I went to get our first apartment, we picked up the Berkeley Gazette. I mean, we wanted to live there. We were in school there. And it said in the ads for apartments, white Christians need only apply. Well, we were white, but we weren't Christian. And that's all the ads said that. So we did find a place. And also in relation to Marvin Kaplan, I want, I remember when Gene said he can't speak, he died for the Martin Luther King celebration of his life. But Marvin Kaplan and Arnie Aronson, and I don't think any of you have heard his name, and one other Jew were the three Jews involved in getting the Voting Rights Act passed. And Arnie and Marvin, out of two of those three, were members of TI for a long time. I just wanted to put that in there. Anyway, Cara Olivia was recalling a story of an experience I had many years ago, which I had problems remembering in its context. The Black Lives Matter movement has brought back many memories in my continual involvement in Black lives from birth to the end of life. I grew up in Petaluma, California, a small farming community where there was one Black resident. He was a shoe shine man. And in high school, there entered a Black student who everybody wanted to befriend. She was unusual. She was outgoing and friendly. Then suddenly she was gone and no one knew why. At my university, there were many Blacks and Jews on the ground, and this was back in the mid 50s. Okay, on the grounds of the university, the Blacks congregated in a segregated way on the front steps of one large building and the Jews on another. Our dorms, which was a co-op, was mixed. After marriage and graduate school, I was awarded a coveted teaching position in the middle of the academic year after being warned that the previous teacher had left due to a nervous breakdown. My first day of teaching was memorable. I walked into the portable classroom, and if anyone's ever been in a portable, they were like little barns where I was teaching. And I heard a lot of giggles, and there were no students. There were supposed to be 33 students. I looked up, and 33 Black students looked down at me from the rafters of the barn-like structure, laughing as they joined me to see what I was about. This is a block-busted housing neighborhood. A good friend's parents had been pressured into selling their home, using a little creativity and weaving in their own cultural experiences and practices, which I had to learn, by the way. I was able to get students involved in hands-on projects. And I often got in my little car after school and visited students and families in their homes, just to see, just to learn, just to talk. Now for the story that Cara Olivia has such vibrant memories of. I need you to keep in mind that this happened in the later half of the 1960s. A Black woman from our babysitting club called to tell me she was trying to nurse her fourth baby for the first time of such an experience for her. She had 3 older children, and she didn't think she was doing it right. I agreed to help her, and everything was fine, and she was so happy. We became very close friends, which we are to this day. The baby was beautiful, dark-skinned little boy. One day she called me to tell me her father had died, and she didn't know what to do with him when she went south for the funeral. I offered to take him and nurse him through the weekend with my own infant. I then got the idea that it would be more convenient for her and for me to take him with her. To a funeral, she gasped. I told her everyone would appreciate seeing him and passing him around. She did, and they did. In those days, we nursed each other's babies at times. Sometimes the mom was late getting back from an appointment. Sometimes the mothers or infants were hospitalized. When either mother or baby was compromised, separation was the rule, and it's not like today. Today, a little better. There's another race-based experiential story that I'd like to tell. In the late 1970s, the public elementary school where our son was in kindergarten instituted a gifted and talented program. All students were tested upon their parents' agreements. Of course, we thought our son was gifted and talented. Our son made it into the not gifted and talented group. The next year, he became bored and disinterested with school. On Veterans Day, parents were allowed to visit their children's classrooms. I decided to return in the afternoon to observe the gifted and talented class and our son's class. There was a low barrier between the two classes. Subject matter in the gifted class was vibrant and interesting, engrossing all of the students who were sitting in a circle on the floor. All the, all the children were white. In our son's class were 9 Black children and our son, sitting at their desks or wandering around, all craning their heads to observe what was going on across the barrier instead of doing the paper assigned. You get the point. We were rabble-rousers in those days, and rabble-rouse we did. I worked in a maternity center as a baby, family, and lactation counselor on the advice of Naomi Kaplan, who was Marvin Kaplan's wife, a psychologist. I went to graduate school in social work, which she said she would do if she could do it all over again. Most of my clients and colleagues were Black, given the county that I worked in. It was in Maryland. It was only after switching employment to a different county that I realized that many clients in the system were not being treated with respect. The statement often went through my head. I would never let my supervisees treat clients like that. And I was very firm about that. And that's what I have.
Sorry, that's wonderful. Thank you. I can't emphasize just how powerful your stories were. When I was just listening to them in one of our social action meetings, and I thank you for you're a gift to all of us in your reaction. Carl has the most information about Neighbors Incorporated, but Carl, I was hoping to keep you for the end because you're going to give us all the facts. If you get, I see you're putting a lot of good information on the side, but I want to get this little old lady here on, and my mother, and then
Never stand in your mother's way because you're afraid of being run over.
yes. So don't think I've forgotten you. I just wanted to say I know you're going to give us the basic background information. I've asked my mother to be here just to share maybe it's one story from of racism growing up in Washington D.C.
Yes, hello. It's so wonderful to see everyone. Hello and Happy New Year.
Can you hear her? Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Good.
Yes, the main story happened in 1939, but for your information, a little background, my mother and father tried desperately not to let the 8 children, know about segregation, but when I was in elementary school, I noticed that there was another school that I could pass every day, and then I figured out they were all white, and yet I had to pass every day and go across the railroad tracks to go to the black school. And maybe for that reason, I cried every day and nobody knew why. And now back to 1939. In 1939, I was preparing to go to Dunbar High School, but I had no shoes and no dress. And yet my family was considered well off. I couldn't get free lunch or anything because my father worked in the government. So my sister Rowena was a seamstress. She made me the dress to go to Dunbar High School, and my sister Olga loaned me her shoes to get there. And my father had worked 2 jobs and sometimes 3, if it includes his beautiful garden. And he said, "I'll try to get your money for your shoes tonight, Georgia." And the next day he came home and said, "Well, I got the money." I said, "How'd you do it? How'd you get the $10?" He said, "I let a man call me the N word, and the man gave me $25. That's a lot of money for that time of our lives." And so I had my shoes for high school after that. So that's the main thing that the segregation I didn't know about until I figured it out by myself. My mother and father didn't let me know about that. So I don't want to prolong things.
Can I give
Yeah.
some context for that? Well, what happened is that there were the black men were taught that don't let anybody call you the N word, and if anybody does, you fight. So people from wherever, from the South, the North, racist white people would actually pay black people to allow them to call them the N word. And my grandfather, when my mother, she had her sister's shoes, or Aunt Rowena's shoes, but they weren't the right size. They didn't fit. They were cloppy shoes, and she go first day of high school, bad shoes. So my grandfather, my mother's father, went and almost like um, it's like paying somebody for sex in the bathroom. Instead of paying somebody for sex, you're paying somebody to allow you to call you an insulting name and put the money on it. And when it's told in a black context, he's not doing it now because it's a different context. I put and it's like it's a long set of you big black ugly. Say the word. Put the money on the table. And then he put the money down. Once you say the word, you can't say another thing. And he put the money on the table. And he came home and brought it home. And you can see one of the things that I'm trying, again, what I'm trying to add to Tifereth Israel's knowledge is not just these facts, but how it appeared from an African American perspective. because see, my mother's too polite to tell you how how it was done. So okay, and I would like to go to Rabbi Feinberg and then to Carl. Rabbi Feinberg, are you there?
Yep, here I am.
Okay, yeah, and I'm
Can you hear me
hoping.
all right? Can you hear me all right?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, good. Well, thanks for the invitation. I feel honored to be part of this group. I don't think my experiences can compete at all with the stories that we've heard so far. I'll just say a few things. I do have experiences with Dr. King.
Mhm.
When I was I grew up in Chicago and outside Chicago, North Shore of Chicago, in a suburb called Highland Park.
Mhm.
I was very active in the shul there, and when I was a sophomore in high school, I told my rabbi, Philip Lippis, alav shalom, that I wanted to become a rabbi. I was about, and I was 15 at the time. And sometime after I told him this, and he came to me and said, how would you like to miss a day of school? And missing a day of high school seemed very attractive to me at the time. Then he said, well, there's this conference in Chicago that I think you would get a lot out of. And the conference was called the First Conference on Religion and Race, and it was sponsored by, at the time, the National Council of Churches, the mainline Protestant organization, the Synagogue Council, which existed at the time, doesn't exist anymore, and the Catholic Diocese of Chicago. And this was a conference at a hotel in Chicago, no longer exists. And at the conference, it was the first time I heard Dr. King speak in person. And it was the first time I heard Rabbi Heschel speak in person. And it had a great, and at this conference were leading theologians of the time representing the different Abrahamic faiths. And I was there all day listening to different people speak. I still remember Dr. Heschel's opening line because it was such a great line. And the conference was at this time of year. I think it was actually either last week's Parsha or this week's Parsha, the beginning of Exodus. And Dr.
Can you
Heschel
raise your
said,
camera just a little?
I'm sorry?
We're getting only the bottom part of your face. Can you adjust it slightly? Yes, thank you.
There you go. How's that?
Thank you. Yeah, good. Yes, thank you. Mhm.
So Dr. Heschel said, the first conference on religion and race was when Moses came to Pharaoh and said, let my people go. As I said, it was a good opening line and
Yes.
very appropriate for that gathering, to say the least. And I think that from that, that time, that period, that was in 1962. So it was it was a year before the Great March on Washington, which was in August of '63.
Mhm.
And it had a great effect on me. Of course, Dr. Heschel's writings had a great effect on me. And of course, whenever I had the opportunity, I went in person to hear Dr. King. When I was my first year in college and during the summer, Dr. King was on the North Shore of Chicago and spoke. I remember going to that rally and that meeting. And everyone has to remember, and I think some of these stories already have highlighted this, how deep the racial animus was at that time. I had the fortune of having a summer job at a chemical factory that was owned by a person of our synagogue, and my rabbi helped me get this job. And I worked in the lab, and the chemist who I worked for was a deep and hardened racist. and often talked about Dr. King being a communist, etc. And where I worked, the white workers ate lunch in one room, and the black workers ate lunch in another room. So the segregation and the racial feeling was quite significant. And so that was the era we grew up in, that I grew up in, and of course the era which we all hoped with the Civil Rights Acts of 64 and 65 passed, the Voting Rights Act, we really thought that a major change was going to happen in this country. I certainly did not think that by the time that I'm now 73, almost 74, that we would still see such bitter racial division in our country, and see such evidence of white supremacy express itself so violently as it did last week, and the fears that we have that it'll express itself even more in the coming weeks. But I certainly saw my role as a rabbi in a congregation inspired by these men, as Rabbi Brahmat so beautifully spoke about, that Judaism has to be about ethics and not just about ritual, and that rabbis have to, be involved in issues. So I guess one of the major issues that I was involved in my career as a rabbi congregation was in the 1980s. Our congregation was a sanctuary congregation. I was a rabbi in Madison, Wisconsin at the time, and I was very much influenced by a colleague of mine who was a social worker who had spent time at the border in Texas. And she came back with these stories about people fleeing violence in Central America and how they were being rounded up and deported. And they were all, that was the time when everyone thought they were all communists, and that the countries, the radicals and the revolutionaries in these countries were somehow communists. In any case, we took in a Guatemalan, we and several churches took in and sponsored a Guatemalan family of 6, husband and wife, and four young children at the time. And they stayed in Madison for about 18 months before others were able to arrange for them to emigrate to Canada. And that certainly had a profound experience. That was a profound experience for our congregation and for the community. The husband, the reason they fled, they were from Guatemala. They fled Guatemala because the husband was a union organizer, and one of his colleagues that he worked with was assassinated. And so they fled because he was afraid for his life. And of course, and so it's again, so disheartening in these last years to see how people fleeing the violence in Central America, again, now in our own time, were looked upon as criminals, and they had to be rounded up along with their children and put in cages and then deported. So these, I guess one of the lessons that I've learned is that these issues don't go away. And we have to be always vigilant and take really strong stands on what we think is the moral high road.
Yeah, thank you for connecting this with people from other parts of the world, not just African Americans and people.
Anyway, so that's a little bit of what I've been involved in my career. Thank you for the opportunity.
May I ask you? I was told that you worked with prisoners. I'm sorry.
I do, yeah. So one of the things I'm involved in now is with Interfaith Action on Human Rights. Our main issue is conditions of confinement in state prisons. And of course, there you see the racism, 40% of the prison population is African American or people of color, whereas they're only 13% of the population. And people who are put in prolonged isolation, solitary confinement, longer than 15 days, it's considered an act of torture. Again, predominantly Black people are the ones who are on these prolonged isolation, which causes all kinds of terrible effects on one's mental and physical health. So that's a whole nother, another issue.
Well,
There's so much to say about the prison world and how it's, I think one thing to note is that for most of us in the Jewish community, it's a universe that we are not familiar with.
mhm.
And we're
Yes.
not affected directly about, here and there we know about some Jewish people who've been convicted of crimes and go to prison. But on the whole, it's something that's really foreign to us. But if you go into an Afro-American church, it's not foreign to them. And so many people are affected directly by having family members, people they love, who are in prison. And so it's that experience. And I guess the other thing I could say about that is that this last summer, I think our eyes were opened once again to the brutality of police practices. And there was widespread protests over these brutal police practices that often cause people to die who are African American or people of color. But I just want to say that these same practices occur in prison. They're brutal places. People are often abused, terribly beat up, and sometimes die because of the brutal conditions within these prisons. And so one of the ways that we know about policing is because of the iPhone, and people can video what goes on. One of the issues in prisons is that we have the videos because prisons are full of security cameras. But too often, the public has no access. Even the people who feel that they've been abused don't have any access to the video footage. So it's just a whole nother issue that we should all learn more about.
Yes, and quite frankly, for the most part, the other we're going to go to Carl next, but essentially, what you're here because you're where we're going, if you know what I mean. Many of us are talking about where we've come from, where we're coming from, but the issue you're bringing out, I think, is where we're going, and we'll be.
Yeah. So both.
You'll be coming back. You'll hear from us again.
Our country is full of prisons with immigrants, and our country is full of 2.1 million members of our country, citizens of our country are either in federal, state, or county prisons. And the bulk of them, 90%, are in state prisons and county jails.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. We shall return to that topic in the Social Action Committee. And now, Carl, would you please help us with I can't see everybody's picture where I am. Let me see.
Yeah,
there he is. Okay, Carl. I put you last because I want to give you the most time.
I hope that I won't need it.
Yeah.
Before I start, let me just add on about prison, something I did learn from Chuck, which is that DC once had its own prison, Lorton, which was problematic to say the least. But when it closed, after it closed, the Federal Bureau of Prisons took DC prisoners, and they're scattered all over the country. So it's very difficult often for families to have any contact with someone who's incarcerated. They can be in Arizona, they can be, if they're lucky in Virginia, lucky is not the word for it, but in Virginia, et cetera, but they're scattered all over the place. And he has a pen pal program that he's developed. I'm sure he'd be glad to give you information about that in his website.
You mean Rabbi Feinberg does?
Yes.
Oh, okay. We'll definitely get back in contact. Okay.
Let me start off with about Marvin. Ralph Mees was president of the People for the American Way, the late 90s and early 2000s. And every year he would give a lecture on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. And in 2001, he started his lecture with, I want to talk about the person who's had the most influence on your life who you've never heard of. And of course, he was talking about Marvin Kaplan. And let me give a couple of resources and be able to describe Marvin. Marvin did so many things, and he did them so well, that they were, it's sort of hard to believe that he wasn't a composite personality. He wasn't, that several different people weren't going under the guise of Marvin Kaplan for all the various things he did. And the first thing I want to show is his book, Father Along. And it's not a vanity press. It was produced by Louisiana State University Press. And Marvin wrote it and finished it just before he died. It's quite remarkable for its candid nature. The other thing, and it really goes into the history of Neighbors Inc., which I will talk about briefly, if anyone can believe that I'm ever brief. The other thing is, let me bring up this share screen.
Did they fix it so you can share?
Bring it forward. Oh. Get this thing out of there. Okay, can you see that?
No.
Really? I turned on share screen.
No, we can see you, we can't see it.
You can't.
You
see-
have to select the screen you're sharing.
What?
You have to hit share screen and then select the screen you're sharing.
I did.
No, we don't see it.
Okay. Oh, yeah, let me hit share. Oh, never mind. What I was going to show you, which I can't at the moment, and let me bring this back so I can see the screen myself, is the plaque from Marvin Kaplan Park. Marvin Kaplan Park is a small DC park. Actually, it's owned by the US Department of the Interior, and it's located at 13th Holly and Alaska Avenues, Northwest, not very far from TI. And it really sets out, the plaque really sets out what Marvin said and did, and I can cite from it. Talks about Marvin was born in 1919 in Philadelphia. And it's dedicated to his memory, whose singular spirit defied bigotry and promoted neighborhoods open to all, regardless of race, religion, and culture. And then he was a World War II vet and a graduate of Temple University. And Marvin was not a lawyer. Marvin was not a political science major. Oh, there, now it decided.
I just put it up. I just found it and put it up. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Marvin was not a political science major. He was a journalist. And he worked for, I believe it's Fairchild, I may be wrong, publications for many years on the Hill. But before that, when Marvin got out of the Army in 1946, 1947, he moved to Richmond, Virginia. And that's on the website. Yeah, his website, thank you. He moved to Richmond, Virginia, and he became an editor of a Jewish progressive newspaper. And he started to work with the unions. And he and his fellow vets were part of an integrated group. And they found, for example, in Richmond in those days, there was only one place in town they could eat together, which was the YMCA, which was the only, because the Ys were integrated. It's the only place. And Marvin and Naomi lived there for several years, and then he moved to DC to take a publishing job. And Neighbors is sort of interesting in that, well, it's more than sort of interesting. Neighbors is interesting and Marvin's interesting because often people establish a national reputation and they come to DC to be involved in national things. And somewhere along in life, they become involved in local things. It was the opposite with Marvin. Marvin was a parent and he owned a home in Tacoma, DC on 3rd Street. and in Manor Park, and he belonged to the Manor Park Citizens Association. Well, in the early 50s, Marvin attempted to get the Manor Park Citizens Association to integrate, allow Black members who were moving into the neighborhood to join. And they were turned down. They were not allowed to join. And this happened to be, for the city's sake and for all our sakes, quite a fortuitous event. Because Marvin then, along with Joe Hairston, who was an African-American attorney with the IRS, founded Neighbors Inc., along with several other people, including Rabbi Abramowitz. And it was dedicated to stopping the white flight in the neighborhoods. Now, let me explain what white flight was. Many of you may know, but let me just go through it briefly. What that meant was real estate agents were going to white families and saying, well, Black people are moving into your neighborhood. You're going to have to get out of here, and you're not going to get much money for your house, so sell now. So they bought low. Then they went to Black families and said, well, you know, this is a white neighborhood. If you want to move into here, you're going to have to pay a premium. And they sold high. So they got commissions on both ways. And people were frightened. They were scared. And it was fear that Neighbors Inc. Was founded to stop. And one of the things, they did many things to stop this. One of them was the district government, even though it was not a home rule government, not a locally elected government, was far more progressive than the congressional committees that passed on its budget and passed many of the laws of the city. They went to the district government and they asked for a law that said, if you put up a house sign for sale, but it's not really for sale, that will be a violation of law. And the commissioners passed it. They enacted it. Why did they do that? Because they found the real estate agents were going around and paying people to put for sale signs on their lawns when they had no intention of selling. And it was a way of increasing the fear. And who did they get to enforce this? Who else? The DC police, not the zoning officials, but the DC cops. And the DC cops would go around and ask, why do you got that sign out there? Oh, a real estate agent paid me to put it up. Oh, okay. And they went and fined them. Afterwards, they got they drafted an open housing law for the district in the early 60s, which became the model for the Housing Act of 1968 federally. The district had a public accommodations law, this is not to deal with Neighbors Inc., that was passed by the old territorial legislature. We had home rule for a very brief time after the Civil War. And it was still on the books, and the city enforced it after a sit-in. The city government enforced it, and when the owners appealed and said it was a null and void because the old territorial government was long gone, et cetera, Supreme Court upheld the district's Court of Appeals as well, which upheld it. So the district had a different sort of history as a mid-Atlantic entity. Anyway, Neighbors Inc. did a lot of things that just, such as testing. You know, the business where you send in a white couple to go in and apply for an apartment somewhere, and they take their credentials and they tell them, oh yes, that'll be just fine. And they send a Black couple in, and the Black couple has exactly the same credentials, and they get turned down. And they did testing like that. They did lists of vendors in the area who would serve the neighborhood. They did social things to promote the community. They had a book and art fair every year, which was heavily attended. In fact, Bobby Kennedy came and spoke at one of them. They started a babysitting co-op in the area. they had an annual picnic. They had a Valentine's Day dance, which Buddy alluded to. One of the reasons when I was a neighbor, I became a neighbor in 78, a member of Neighbors in 1978, was that Tifereth Israel allowed the serving of alcohol, and the churches wouldn't. So TI had a leg on the market, as it were. In any event, Marvin also, outside of Neighbors Inc., did many things which are certainly worth repeating. Marvin became the head of the Leadership Conference for Civil Rights in the 60s. And Marvin was hired by Joe Rao, an old lion of civil rights in the city and in national affairs, for the following reasons. One, because of Neighbors Inc., he'd had some real organizational roots. Two, his beat as a reporter was Capitol Hill, and he knew the offices and he knew the people there. So, and three was, of course, Marvin's really wrote quite well. So the AFL-CIO ponied up the money, and they hired Marvin for a year, and it turned into be something like 20 years that he was there. And this is when they wrote, he was one of the architects of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 65, Title IX, and also Marvin helped integrate. Marvin was one of the leaders to bring Hispanic and other leaders from other traditions into the leadership conference. So Marvin went from local to national politics, and he still kept a hand locally. For example, he was on the board of TI. He was, I saw in one place I noticed in our archives, Marvin was secretary of TI's board for a couple of years. Marvin was active in his local PTA. In other words, he was a dad, and he writes about what his positions on integration meant for his family, his children, in his book. And it's quite, he was quite forthcoming about his feelings about why was I doing this for myself or for my children by putting them in as the only white kids in their school. So Marvin did that. He also was active in the Yiddish revival movement. He was quite fluent in Yiddish. And finally, I'll add, Marvin knew Japanese. Marvin, and this is a bit of a story, but I love it. And Marvin told me this, it's in his book a bit, but Marvin told me this. In Lloyd Benson's terms, I knew Marvin, and Marvin was a friend of mine. When he was drafted into the Army, what he put down was he could drive a truck, because he drove his father's meat truck. His father was a butcher. And he was digging latrines in Texas, the Army. And a guy comes along and says, Mr. Kaplan, you did quite well on the Army's mental test, or whatever it was called. Well, they sent him to the University of Michigan to study Japanese. And that's how he spent World War II. I said, so you were on the GI Bill before there was a GI Bill? And he said, exactly. And Marvin, while he had taken courses at Temple in political science, wasn't no radical and was not really socially engaged. It was the Japanese professors who had come out of the internment camps to teach these courses who raised and lit the spark of his social conscience more than anything else. And I asked him, did you ever use your Japanese? He said, no, never. But he was quite proud of what he did, and quite proud of the fact that he had gone to Michigan, which is not on the plaque. We decided there was only so many accomplishments.
Yeah. Okay. That's beautiful. Thank you, Carl. I'm hoping that there'll be questions for all of our people here as we go forward. I really appreciate all of you who've shared today. rather than spread you out over the next 5 years, I've squeezed you all into 1 hour and 15 minutes. Because I thought it was important to get at least a taste of some of the work and some of the information.
Excuse me, Cara Olivia. I'm just looking at one of the comments about there was a Yiddish Shabbos
Oh,
club
yeah.
TI that Marvin ran. And
Yes.
would you tell your story about Marvin? About your,
That's a wonderful story.
it's a wonderful
My own
story.
personal story in this very house that happened, came to the door right here. I'm sitting beside. Well, I feel like I've said it so many times. There can't be anybody at TI who hasn't heard it.
Yes, go ahead.
Like hearing it again.
I was, I guess we were the third black family into this neighborhood. We were block bussed into this neighborhood. Gosh, in 1961, and the white people were so mean. They just look at you so mean. We go up to the Safeway, up on Piney Branch Road. And actually, I've seen 3 Safeways there, and I remember just buying a bunch of grapes and people looking at me like I didn't have a right to eat grapes or something, and this is so nasty. And I remember I came home one day and I was sitting over on the sofa right here, and wondering what made white people so mean and nasty. What had I ever done to them, and what's wrong with them, and all that. And while I was sitting here, there was a ring on the doorbell, and I went to the door, and it was Marvin Kaplan, and I guess it was his wife. I wasn't as aware of it.
Naomi.
Naomi, and a black couple as well. But it was Marvin I remember the most. He was in the front, and he came to the door. He introduced himself. He said, "I was a teenager, and I was at Coolidge High School." And he said, "Is your family home?" And yes, like my mother and father and my brother all came down, and we all sat down in the living room with this white Marvin and Naomi and a black adult black couple, and he came to welcome us to the neighborhood. And to me, it was like, talk about something happened, the right thing happening at the right moment in my life, because I was right there deciding things. What is wrong with these people? And the idea that with all this nastiness and the neighbors who all were gone within a year, all the white neighbors were gone within a year. But Marvin Kaplan came and welcomed us to the neighborhood. And even though it didn't, he introduced us to Neighbors Incorporated. He made me feel like white
And
people
then
weren't
at TI,
all nasty. I met him at TI. I remember sitting beside him. I didn't know who he was. After I joined, about a year or so before he died, I guess, I was sitting there and I mentioned that I told him this whole story. And he said, "Oh, that's me," And we laughed and giggled together right there at the table at the TI Kiddush. And I thanked him and I told him what an important moment that was in my life, that he came to the door. And that's why I'm actually, even though the organization is somewhat defunct now, um, I am the president. And I became president not because I'm not a sociology person, I'm not social sciences, but I didn't want it to die. So I accepted the presidency, and now it's finally being taken over by people who really are into the sociology part of it. And I can share this story and all the stories you've told here.
let me add one. Cara Olivia, let me quickly add. Marvin's papers are in they've changed the name recently, the Washingtoniana division of the DC Library. They were donated after he died, and I spoke to one of the persons in charge there about their being organized. And as of last year, he said, "Oh, we're finally getting around to them." But my younger daughter, Hannah, wrote a project when she was in junior high about Neighbors Inc. And we went down and we went through the papers. And at one point, Hannah turns to me and says, "Oh, Dad, here's another one of Marvin's hate letters." And I said, "What do you mean hate letters?" She said, "Every year, Marvin would write the Post complaining because they had separate want ads for black and white, or of course they were called colored, for job ads. And the Post was editorializing against these in their editorial pages while running them in their on-ad papers. And on top of that, he would write humorous columns that got published in the Post. And so, as I said, he was like a composite in the sense that he did so many things and did them so well.
Yeah, and let me mention Louise. I remember the white kids in the neighborhood. And Louise Kelly was one of the white kids in the neighborhood. She lived 2 blocks away. And she was always I found out later, obviously many decades later, she was always being punished because she would play with the black kids. So, you know, there it is. She's a troublemaker from the beginning.
Do you know about the babysitting business?
Mhm.
Many of the neighbors were upset with Marvin because he destroyed the market for babysitters. He insisted on paying them minimum wage,
Mm.
which was way above what the going rate was.
Yes, exactly.
And the kids
35
started
cents.
demanding that. Thank you.
Okay. Well, we're at
Thank
2:16.
you, Carol Olivia.
Yes, thank you. It's 2:16 now. I didn't want to go past 2:30 at the most. So if there are any questions, please ask them, unmute yourself and ask them, or type them in the chat area. Any questions for anyone?
I'll say.
Okay. Esther, yes.
Yeah, we're just, it's interesting bringing back memories. And I think sessions like this really do, especially among us older folks. But we moved to Maryland, Silver Spring in 1965. And I met this woman just talking and coming out of her house. And she looks at me and says, "You're new, you've got to go join Neighbors Incorporated." So we did. And when you were talking about the art and book fair, I pointed because the first major painting we ever bought was at the art and book fair. But it's Marvin we always took him to the retreat. We lived close and we took him to the retreat at TI. And he would always bring books of Yiddish curses and read us about curses. And he would tell them, and then he'd have to translate them. But that's what he did. He was really big into Yiddish curses.
I got to teach Marvin one.
Okay.
Alas chazonim zonim aronim.
What?
All
Translate.
cantors are fools.
Oh, what?
Oh, what?
All cantors are fools.
Oh, my.
Alas chazonim zonim aronim. That was one of my father's favorite verses.
Okay, Barbara and Howard, come on, you must have something to say. Come on, unmute yourself and talk. Barbara, Howard.
It takes a while to find the unmute button, sorry. Do we have anything to say? Well, we were not we were not in on the early stages of TI, TI becoming RTI, and we were also not involved in starting Neighbors Inc. or anything else like that, but we did, decide to live here. And I mean, this was the only place we looked for a house. Mm-hmm. And that's because I will shorten it by saying it's because I knew Judy and David Cohen, who their first house was here. Mm-hmm. And I learned about the neighborhood. And long before I met Howard, I decided that if I ever got married, this is where I was going to get. And it's worked out very well for us. And, so we've benefited from being part of this, basically.
And one of the interesting turnarounds is that my mother, who taught science.
Oh, yes,
taught your children, and then you taught me.
Oh, right.
So it's a part of the circle.
That's true. Yes. Our children just loved you, Georgia, as a teacher.
Science teacher.
I really loved those classes when you came. You were already retired, but in your retirement, you came and you volunteered at Shepherd for once a month, twice a month, whatever it was, but you were great.
Yeah.
Nice.
I love both of the stories from both of your children, but I always love the one of Ilana talking about her father.
Oh, right.
Yeah, this is my father. So, where does the sun come? What is it? And is the sun closest to the earth in the winter or the summer? And everybody raised their hand and yelling out the wrong answer. And she's going, "No, but my father said." Come on up here and let me. I don't know.
Olivia?
What your father said. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Diana?
Yeah. I don't even know where to begin, but there were just a few things I wanted to say. In terms of housing in DC, I wanted to share that when my husband and I came to DC in the spring of 1968, after having been Peace Corps volunteers, we stayed at the Tabard Inn, which is still in existence.
Oh, yes.
And all phone calls went through the switchboard, and we were looking for a place to live. And I was looking at ads in the Post, and I'd call these apartments, and I didn't know anything about, where they were. And I said I was interested in the apartment, and the person would say on the phone, it's not available. And I'd call the next ad, and they would say it's not available. And after doing this many, many times, the switchboard operator from the Tabard Inn interrupted me, and she said, honey, they don't know if you're white or black. And the apartment is not available unless you go there in person and they see the color of your skin. And I always say that coming to DC in the spring of '68 after Dr. King was assassinated, and then I was a volunteer. Well, I won't go there. It was more culture shock coming here than it was in the jungles of Thailand. I wanted to say that I mentioned this to Cara Olivia before shul. A friend of mine named Lauren Strauss, who's a professor at AU, is writing a book about Blacks and Jews in DC. And she's going to want to speak to all of you, Carl and Cara Olivia and Mark and anyone who has, and I've put her in touch with Marvin's son, Bennett, who lives in the area. And she participated recently in a conference, and she talked about Marvin and had pictures of Marvin and Naomi. So this whole subject, and she'd be a good speaker, actually, Cara Olivia, for us to have. She's in Israel at the moment. And the other thing which people know is I joined TI in the 70s because of Marvin and because of Yiddish of Shabbos, because I was looking for a shul that valued Yiddish and valued Yiddishkeit. And he, as someone said in the chat, of course, was the organizer of that. Thanks.
Okay. Well, thank you. It sounds like we're coming to pretty much to the end of our talk here. Margie, do you have a comment?
I do. My husband wouldn't say so, but if I could say in his behalf, he can shoot me later. Because of Carl's long time ago, but long-standing appointment with the district, employment with the district government, he's probably the only one amongst us who actually knew how to get a park named, because he knows who owns the land and he knows who mows the lawn, which is not the same agency who owns the land. So this is a whole big, long story. But at any rate, Carl is the one who crafted, because he knew how to craft what it needed to look like, the resolution to the city council, and got the park named for Marvin. And spec'd out and found the people to build and install the signs and the marker, and arranged for the neighborhood to get together to do the dedication of the park. At least 10 years after the park was named, but it hadn't really been dedicated. At any rate, I wanted to make sure he gets some credit for all that. It is a bunch of bureaucratic nonsense that few amongst us would have the wherewithal to win through it all. But Carl did, and I want him to get credit for it.
Now I'm going to have to do the dishes for a month.
Carl.
Okay.
There's time for one little vignette on Marvin Kaplan's Yiddishkeit.
That's your doctor.
Yes.
I'm sorry. Oh, my mother's recognizing you. I'm sorry.
Good to see you.
You're one of my
Everybody's
doctors.
doctor.
Yeah.
Before we used to have reunions, TI, and before there was reunion at the place we went to most recently. Does anybody in this audience remember Orkney Springs, the reunion?
Oh yes, oh yes.
was
The
like,
retreats where we took Marvin.
right. Well, all right. Let me tell you about one of those retreats with Marvin. It was Sunday morning. Everybody's getting ready to get out, but we were going to have a little program in the morning of Marvin reading a Yiddish tale from a volume that was that thick called Yennevelt by Joaquin New Groeschel. It's a collection of Yiddish stories. And we are sitting in this this retreat house, which is sort of like a log cabin with fireplace going, and there's smoke in the air, and everybody takes a seat around the fireplace, and Marvin is in the center in a chair, and he pulls out the book and he's reading a Yiddish story from Yennevelt. And in the audience there you have doctors, lawyers, social workers, everybody, about 80% of the people around listening to Marvin have postgraduate degrees in something. And we are all listening like children around somebody reading a fairy tale, enraptured with Marvin Kaplan's story and his enunciation at the appropriate Yiddish moments. I just want to mention that, and also mention that in the Sholem Aleichem Yortzeit that we used to have at TI with Diana Zur, Marvin Kaplan, they were precious. I always enjoyed them immensely. Knowledge. Oh, it's so good to hear the Mama Lotion being spoken with such pronunciation.
And I want to confirm that Marvin was a wonderful storyteller over and over and over again.
Wow. Well, he certainly knows how to arrive at the right moment.
For 2 hours each way, back and forth to Orkney Springs, we heard stories.
Okay. Well, I think a lot of stories are going to come out of this, Jessica. We're going to come up with some stuff for you for the menorah. And I think we're pretty much finished. I'll ask Jean or Bob Ferron or Rabbi Werbo, if you have anything more before we close it out.
Well, just I wanted to say that, we have this type of program every year in memory of Martin Luther King, and it has, expanded in areas of topics. But I think that this particular one has really hit home because it involves us, and that is very important to know that we came from there.
I would just add that many synagogues in the DC area have organized events on racial justice, social justice issues in the last year. But Cara Livia felt, and we agreed with her, that she wanted to do something close to TI. She wanted to bring people connected with TI to talk about the involvement of TI members in social justice and racial justice issues. I think, Cara Livia, your instinct was right. This has been absolutely marvelous. And we look forward to the other events you are organizing during the rest of this year. I'm sure they'll be equally wonderful. So thank you.
I won't list them now, but you'll hear from me soon.
Yeah, thank you for taking this approach of trying to find connections close to our synagogue, close to our congregation, and highlighting the involvement of TI members in racial justice and social justice action. Thank you.
It's been wonderful. Thank you.
Rabbi Werbo, you want to be there?
I just wanted to briefly express my thanks, Bob, for on your leadership of the Social Action Committee. Thank you, Jean, for putting together this Shabbaton. Oh, you get to see our whole room. We're gonna go back. Ooh, a mess. Jean for putting together the Shabbaton, and Cara Livia for our speaker this morning, as well for the panel here today. To our panelists, thank you very much. It really is inspiring, and hearing what everybody's saying, we can all wonder what are the stories that are going to be told 20 years from now, 40 years from now about what we're doing to help in racial justice and the betterment of our community. So we all have a lot to do, and hopefully through the actions that we can take at TI, we'll be a part of that.
Yes, you've actually exactly what inside my head. That's one of the reasons why I chose these people. I said, in 10 to 20 years from now, you'll be having Shabbatons about us and we'll be in the grave. Well, why don't we have us now?
And write it up for the menorah, please.
Write it up for the menorah, exactly. So
Short version, long version, we have nothing but white space. The only article I've gotten so far is about coins. So,
Not
or no,
white.
actually it's about treasury notes at Terrazine. It's
okay, it's 2:31.
things like that. Send me your
Carol
stuff.
Olivia,
Yes.
Carol Olivia, I would think it would be good to do an event like this where we can actually record the speech, the talks by these people, because it would be good to 20 years from now for people to hear what they have to say.
Yes, I'm
So
sorry.
perhaps we can do
You got the mail coming, everything's happening at once here. Yes, I agree. I'm so sorry we didn't record it, but I feel like I don't want to turn anybody off from staying.
No,
but
we can't do it on
But
Shabbat.
isn't the YouTube thing recorded, or is it just?
It was promoted to YouTube, which will allow us to have a recording of it.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Oh, good.
We will have one.
Good.
Yeah.
But that still isn't a substitute for putting it in the menorah.
And also, may I say that it belongs in the archive if there's a recording.
Yeah, thank you. Well, for you to say that means a lot, Cynthia, because I love learning from you. You're a wonderful teacher.
I said that in the last menorah.
Oh, did you? Okay.
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Yeah, read the menorah, for heaven's sake.
Right. So fairly well, we're going to go and eat and do things like that. I appreciate it. And
Time for the Shabbat afternoon nap.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, everyone. I want to make sure I'm going to save these notes here.
Carol Olivia, this has been phenomenal. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
You.
At 6:15.
Yeah. She's grinning at her doctor again. See, I don't know if you can see she's grinning at you.
Well, you all look wonderful.
Yes.
It's very hard to drop off of this, you know.
Yeah, somebody's
The
going to
fact
be.
that a nap is awaiting me.
We'll be here all night.
Yeah, well, everybody go take a nap.
Okay, we'll leave it.
Oh, right here, we're going to get to take one.
This stays open, so stay as long as you'd like.
I just want to say that this is so powerful that I'm glad there was one way to save it, because hearing the personal stories spoken by the people themselves has such an impact of reality. It's not like a story you're hearing and hearing. This we need to save, particularly the piece that truly got me was the one about how you got some extra money, Georgia.
Oh.
Yes.
This was like, as I wrote, a gut, just punched me in the gut, kind of. I just pursed out. People need to know that this went on, and not, with all due respect, folks, not wait for 10 and 5 and 20 years from now. Next year or the year after, will things be better? What have we done to make some kind of a difference? So I thank you for this and wish we can, in the future, record these.
Thank you. It's very good.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Shabbat shalom, everybody.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat
Rabbi
shalom.
Abraham,
Buddy.
in particular.
Thank you, buddy.
Shabbat shalom. Oh, buddy, that was so
Here we go.
Can someone copy the chat?
I've copied the chat.
Thank you, Sherry. That's Rachel. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.